Good morning and welcome to Bookish. I wanted to get my review of Celeste Ng's Little Fires Everywhere out as soon as possible. I just finished reading the book, and while it's fresh on my mind, I wanted to tell you what I thought about it. I wanted to tell you, some ideas I had about the book. The first thing you need to know about the book is it starts with a fire, as you may be able to pick up on from the title, and that fire is really the culmination of the events described in the book. And Ms. Ng uses it very cleverly to kind of begin this story of two very different families whose lives quickly become enmeshed with one another and then are just as quickly separated by the actions of characters and people in both families. I really liked this book. I didn't think it was perfect. I didn't think it was necessarily a great book, but I do think it's a very good book. I do believe that Celeste Ng is a very, very talented writer. The story involves two very different families whose lives become entangled with one another very quickly, and then are, almost just as quickly pulled apart by decisions made on the part of the mothers in both those families. So the first family is the Richardson family. The Richardson family is almost they're almost like cardboard cutouts of characters. They fit very neatly into our stereotypical ideas of upper middle class white families living in suburban communities. In this case, the community they live in is Shaker Heights, Ohio, a real community. As a matter of fact, I believe it's a community in which the author Celeste Ng actually grew up in. And in this community, everything is very carefully planned. Everybody worries about their kids' education, and it seems like one of those communities in which they try to do everything they can to keep anything bad from happening. But of course, bad things do happen. So the Richardsons themselves kind of represent, I think, this stereotypical white American affluent family. Mr. Richardson is a lawyer, and he's very successful. Mrs. Richardson, who a lot of the story surrounds and involves her acts and her actions, was a very socially conscious young woman who had very definite plans about what she wanted to do with her life. But by the time we meet her, she is clearly feeling that she missed out on some things, that she made some decisions and made some choices that cost her, an opportunity to do some things in order to get others. And it's Mrs. Richardson's actions which in lots of ways drive the story forward. They have 4 kids. Their oldest son is named Trip. He's athletic and good looking, and he's almost like a character out of almost any kind of teen movie. Their second oldest child is a daughter named Lexi. Lexi is very opinionated. She's very pretty. She's very self-confident. And she's also socially conscious. In a way, she is much like her mother was. Their third child's name is Moody. Moody is a very thoughtful, sensitive young man. It's Moody who will bring the other family, the Warren family, who I'll describe in just a minute, into the orbit of the Richardsons. And then their youngest daughter is named Izzy. Izzy is the troublemaker. She's the rebel. She's the one that nobody else in the family seems to understand. Those are fairly generic sounding characters, and one of the things I think that's true in the book, and I'm not sure if this is true, this was intentional or not, is that Ng seems to kind of use them as stand-ins for ideas about American society, and I don't think that's handled particularly subtly. So the other family is the Warren family. They're really just 2 members of the Warren family. There's Mia, the mother, who is an artist, a photographer, and her daughter Pearl. The Warrens lead a vagabond lifestyle. They move from city to city. They're hardly in one place for longer than 6 months. Every time Mia finishes an artistic project, she moves and picks Pearl up. They have very few possessions. Her daughter Pearl is smart and pretty and very sensitive, and it's Pearl and Moody's friendship that brings the Warrens into the orbit really of the Richardsons family and begins the process of enmeshing those 2 families. And it's Mia's decisions which will in some ways provoke Mrs. Richardson. And by saying that, I don't mean that Mia's wrong. I just mean that those decisions are the one that seem to provoke Mrs. Richardson to take some action, which does kind of have a real impact on the rest of the story. So those two families become deeply enmeshed. Pearl, through a friendship with Moody, begins spending a tremendous amount of time with the Richardsons. She becomes friends with Lexi. Not surprisingly and somewhat disappointingly, obviously, she falls in love with Tripp, and she just becomes really kind of enmeshed in that family. Izzy, for her part, eventually makes the opposite migration and begins spending a lot of time with Mia, helping her with the art project, and over at the Warrens' home, which, by the way, they rent from the Richardsons. So these two families end up getting enmeshed in lots of ways. There's the friendship, there's the fact that the Warrens rent their home from the Richardsons. There's the fact that eventually Mia goes to work, at least part-time, in the Richardsons' home as a cook and a housekeeper. This gives her access to a lot of information about the Richardsons. So what changes all this, and there's a lot of time spent in the book setting up these relationships and getting those two families together. But what causes the separation, or what causes the problem, is a decision by Mia to try to help a Chinese immigrant woman, regain custody of her child. That is what sets Mrs. Richardson off, and I won't spoil it and give away why. And that's what eventually leads to the division between the two families and a return of Mia and Pearl to their vagabond lifestyle, and causes them to leave Shaker Heights. So the novel tries to deal with a lot of different issues, I think, and sometimes it deals with them effectively, and sometimes it doesn't. Some of the secondary, or maybe tertiary is even a better word for it, storylines involve issues of race. Between African Americans and white Americans, there are issues of race between Asian Americans and white Americans. Those issues are brought up, and some are dealt with fairly effectively, and some I think is a little heavy-handed, and I'll get to that in a minute. One of the things that struck me is that almost every issue revolving around pregnancy is discussed or dealt with in some way in the book. People who have lots of kids, people who can't have kids, issues of adoption, all these issues surrounding pregnancy are brought up in the book. But I found that to be really interesting, and I really thought that those issues of motherhood and pregnancy were really beautifully dealt with in an incredibly sensitive way. And I meant to mark the line, but one of my favorite things in the book that I'll just mention as a side that really struck me and hit an emotional chord with me was the idea that as our kids get older, we as parents have to learn to endure not having their physical touch as often, that when they're children we hold them and we carry them, and as they get older we hold their hands, that they cling to us, and then as they get older and older they need less and less of our physical attention, and as parents we have to deal with missing that and kind of the heartbreak of that. I thought that was really beautifully done. Like I said, I really liked the book, and I thought it was an incredibly good story, and Mia Warren, who, when you read the book you'll find out, is an incredibly interesting and complex character with a really fascinating story, and I really liked that, and I was relieved, by the way, when the story focused more and more on Mia. But one of the things that bothered me a little bit about the book is that there is a prolonged discussion about the rights and wrongs of adoption of minority, I'm going to use that term, sorry, of minority children by white Americans. And while that story about that adoption is integral to the plot, and it's really the plot turning point, as you'll find out when you read it, I thought that there was just too much heavy-handed laying out of the arguments on both sides. The book kind of lost part of its art in the process and became too much of a sociological discussion and too preachy. So, I had a problem with the book in that way. Not that I don't think the issue shouldn't have been dealt with, and it wasn't that the issue was brought up at all or that I have a problem with the issue being in the book. It's just there was just too much detail. At one point there's literally just a blow-by-blow account of the legal arguments made in court on both sides, and that really kind of took me out of the moment of the book and being involved in the story, and I almost felt like Ms. Ng felt like she had to tack on some kind of socially conscious depth to her story by putting all that in, and I really think it was there without it. So, that's my one criticism. Having said that, I think Mrs. Ng is an incredibly talented writer, that she is able to involve you in the story incredibly quickly, and she writes brilliant sentences, and her pacing of the novel is incredibly good. As a matter of fact, as I was reading the book, I wrote notes to myself, and after just, I think, reading 27 pages of the book, I wrote this note. I said, how did she do it? How did she take a setting and character types that can be found in thousands of books and make something so special? I'm on page 27 and I'm hooked, I'm invested, I have to know about these people and I have to know what happens. And to me, that is a true artistic talent in a writer. I truly think she's really talented, and she is going to be an incredibly important author in American literature and in American writing moving forward. Thank you for watching.